Hello beauties, I hope you're doing amazing. I'm so excited today because I want to talk to you all about my favorite palettes of this year. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Let's go into the video. Beauties, I figured I should do this video now because we're approaching holiday season and there's going to be a lot of sales going on around, well, the next few weeks and perhaps into the end of the year. The list we're going to go through is not ranked. This is going to be completely in random ordering, and I don't actually know if everything we're going to talk about is even going to be on sale, but this might help you figure out if something is for you or not. In this list, I have excluded any palette that can't be used by itself. So I've only picked palettes where I could make full looks and varieties of looks. So this automatically excludes any all shimmer palette that I have because I'm not somebody who makes all shimmer looks. That's just not how I use makeup, at least right now. And I don't even remember if we had any all matte palette. I don't think I even own any all matte palettes, so I'm not even going to comment on that. But let's get started. The first palette I want to talk about is Sugar and Grunge. And yes, beauties, again, I don't know what's going on with my Sugar and Grunge. This palette doesn't close, but it's still a favorite palette from this year. The color story is cool tone, so maybe it doesn't go with every skin tone, but it really goes with mine. And I managed to be able to use it in some very interesting and different eye looks. I did not realize I could do that much variety in looks with this palette. The fact that this palette is in the back of my mind every time I need mattes to complement with some other shimmer palette itself tells me that this palette is such a memorable and good palette. Now, I actually have been thinking about why is it that I like this palette more than Lure. There's a lot of not exactly the same colors, but kind of similar colors. And what I came to realize is that there's more variety in this palette. You have more browns and neutral colors like grays in this palette than you have in Lure. In Lure, you literally just have a brown and a black. But here you have enough neutral color and then you have reds. So there's a lot more variety in this palette compared to Lure palette. If I were to change something about this palette, it would be to make it close. But if I wanted to change something about the color story of this palette, I think these two colors are too similar. One of them is a little more bright. One of them is a little more creamy. I don't mind the fact that these are jumbled. So the purple one is not at the top of the purple column, but I still feel like, you know, one of these could have been just a silver to go with this column. But still, even that is me being super nitpicky. I like this palette as it is. Palette number 10 is not a palette I've talked about a whole lot, but I actually did this eye look with this palette. And drum roll, it's Butterfly Kaleidoscope from Mika Beauty Shop, beauties. And this is actually a brand I tried for the first time this year. And I was not expecting how much I enjoyed this palette. I have a video, if it's not already on my channel, it's gonna come up, where I've done 2 eye looks with this palette. I've also used this palette in one of my To Buy or Not to Buys. The shimmers are very, very nice and high quality. And the mattes are also very pigmented. You can see it in the look that I'm wearing. So I was so impressed with this palette. If I wanted to change one thing about this palette, I would add a darker matte. Now, I can get a lot of different looks with this palette, and I don't mind using this shimmer in the outer V, which is what I've done today, or even this one, which is a multichrome. Let me do this so you can see. But it would have been nice to have a dark matte. Beauties palette number 9 should not surprise anybody because we've talked about it before. It is Chucky palette. Although I just learned that the name of this palette is actually Crazy in Love. I've been calling this the Chucky palette all along. I somehow never saw that. Yes, beauties, although I never thought that I would like this palette as much as I do, I really, really like this palette. And I think part of the reason for that is that I did not realize how much these colors were missing in my collection. And I have been really enjoying making different kinds of eye looks with this palette. Now, this palette does have maybe a little more of matte black than I was expecting. I mean, just look at it. And it could have a blood red. Nothing new here. We've been talking about it before, but it's still one of my favorite palettes of this year. I could not have this list without talking about this palette. I have used this palette time and time again. I've traveled with this palette. It's very easy to travel with. It's pretty compact and nice, and it's pretty lightweight, which is super nice, and it hasn't been damaged. I've traveled with it. It has a mirror, everything. Yeah, I love this palette. Number 8 might surprise you all a little bit because I don't think I've talked about this very often, although I do have a video with this palette on my channel, and it is Warriors Wear Pink from Gourmand Girls. I bought this palette to support the cause originally, and I was not expecting to like this palette as much as I did. What I liked about this palette was that I could do varieties of looks. You do have some neutrals here. You do have the black, brown, creams, etc. You have a red, purple, pink. For doing colorful looks, you can use the brown and the black with some of these reds to do more of a smoky, sort of a gothy, smoky type of look. You can do very Valentine's Day romantic look with some of these shimmers. I also thought the quality was amazing. If I wanted to change something about this palette, I would probably do something about this matte black. I also think I might have mentioned in my review of this palette that these two colors look a little too similar. Did we need both? I don't know. Palette number 7, beauties, I don't think is going to surprise anybody, and it is Muse from Cosmic Brushes. I liked this palette because of all the reasons why I generally like Cosmic Brushes palettes. So in terms of compactness, quality of the packaging and everything, it's very nice and consistent with everything we've seen in the past year from Cosmic Brushes. In terms of color story, it's very nice. You can get a variety of looks with this. You can do spring looks with all the greens, you can do fall looks, you can do grungy looks, you can do neutral looks. You have quite a few neutral colors here. You can do colorful looks. You have pinks, greens, purples, orange. Beauties, palette number 6 should also not surprise you. We've talked about this palette many times before. I've done a lot of looks with it. Yeah, I'm trying to create some suspense. It's the Inspired palette from Adept Cosmetics. The color story of this palette might not be for everybody, but of course I'm a color lover, so this is so amazing for me. And I've loved using it. The only complaint I have about this palette is that it could have had maybe an yes, beauties, I'm saying this. I can't even believe that I'm saying this, but maybe a brown, like a darker brown matte. There's a little bit of limitation and overlap in the mattes that this palette has. You can make a whole lot of variety of green looks, variations of green looks with this, but I could not make something that was a little bit more neutral. You could also make some things that have shifts of pink, but if you're including any mattes in your look, you are going to get some green in the look, which is why I thought, well, you can't have as much variety in the look unless you want to do an all shimmer look, which is just not how I do my looks. Okay, beauties, this is going to be a little bit controversial now because the next palette we're going to talk about actually came out end of last year, but I'm pretty sure it came out in December, and I know for a fact I didn't talk about it really a whole lot last year because I ended up owning it this year, and yeah, I'm including it anyway. And it is Aura Struck. The other part of it is that I'm pretty sure this palette is going to be on some form of a sale because that's what ColourPop does this time of the year. So I do want to mention, I really like this palette. There is a variety of reasons why I like this palette. First of all, ColourPop quality. Second, the color story is very different from pretty much anything we've seen from ColourPop itself. Anything we saw from ColourPop when this came out or before this came out, and when this came out, we were not in the middle of everything being cool toned. That kind of happened afterwards, which actually now makes me wonder if ColourPop started the trend with this palette. Because, you know, now you see a lot of palettes that might be a part of this palette or a dupe of this palette, and that was not the case when this came out last December. The other thing about ColourPop that I absolutely love and I can't get enough of, and I keep talking about, is that these palettes are all magnetic, and I love making my own palettes. So it's amazing that if I'm traveling and I want to take some of these shades with me, I don't have to take the whole palette. What I can do is use this, pull out a few of the shades that I want to take with me, put them in a magnetic palette, and take it. That has started becoming part of the purchase decision when I'm planning on palettes to buy. The more brands that allow for that, the more I'm probably going to buy stuff from them. If I wanted to change something about this palette, it would be that it's a little big. I think I made a video even mentioning specific colors that could be removed from this palette, with the palette not really losing a whole lot in terms of color story. But I still wanted to have this palette even after that, because I was like, this is so unique. Okay, beauties, we're approaching the end. It's getting kind of suspenseful. Palette number 4 is Into the Night from Glaminatrix. The types of looks I can make with this palette have a lot of variety. But this palette, I could do very funky 1980s neon looks. I could do super night, smoky type of looks. I could even make kind of goth looks with some of these colors. Some of these shimmers, beauties. This one is sort of a multi-chrome goodness. That one is a super metallic. Yeah, I love this palette. This one is also super metallic. Glaminatrix mentioned they're going to bring this back end of the year. So the reason I included it in this ranking was with the hope that if they bring it back and you are interested, you can pick it up. So I'm still hoping they're going to bring it back, as they mentioned, end of the year, or some batches of this. And I definitely wanted to talk about it and let you all know that I love this palette, just in case you were still wondering. Okay, beauties, we're approaching the end. The next palette I want to talk about is The Moth and the Moon from Dia Varun. This is the first palette from this brand, and I've already done a few looks with this palette, and I love it. In terms of quality, I love the quality of the mattes. One concern I've seen with earlier palettes from new brands is mattes, particularly when you have very bright colors like this. The mattes might be a little thin with neon-y colors. That was not the case with this palette at all. And then the shimmers are so sparkly and shifty and beautiful. From what I understand, the owner of this brand is somebody who's super active on Instagram. I actually have been following her. She did a couple of collabs with Shine by Esty last year, so she knows her shimmer and she knows her colorfuls. And I believe that it's because of that this palette was so nice. I've already used this in one of my To Buy or Not to Buys, but I'm going to post a few more looks with it on my channel. And just to give you more ideas of what you can do with this kind of color story. If I were to change a few things about this palette, one of them would be that I would add some wax to the packaging. I got some of this glitter on the packaging and it's kind of smudged and it's not going away. The other thing is that there's no name for these pans. I don't know how that happened, because if I'm referring to a color, I have to say what the color is or show people, and I can't say use this color. So that's the other thing. The other thing I want to mention, and that's not unique to this brand, but some of the brands that we've talked about, is it would have been great if these pans were magnetic and were coming out, because I love some of these colors and I wish I could use them when I make my own custom made palettes. Okay, beauties, this second palette, and yes, we're approaching the end. It's getting so exciting and suspenseful. But palette number 2 is Culture 2 from Juvia's Place. I loved this palette. I don't have Culture 1. What I remember from the palette, just off the top of my head, was that it didn't have enough deep colors, and I always like to deepen out somewhere of my eyes. So I was like, I don't think I can use this palette by itself. But this one, on the other hand, beauties, has a lot of very nice colors and amazing quality. In fact, this palette has kind of a few multichromes. Like, this is one of those shades that goes gold to green. And then you have this one that kind of goes teal to green to kind of gold. I absolutely loved this matte. Also this one, the burgundy, so nice. Yeah, there's a variety of looks you can make with this palette. In fact, I have a video with this palette also on my channel, and I don't even think the eye looks that I do are covering the half of it. You know, just look at some of these pinks. You know, you could mix the pinks with the purples, with the blues. There is a whole lot of things you can do. And it has the matte quality as well as the shimmer quality we know of Juvia's Place. Yeah, super versatile palette. It's also pretty light and easy to travel with. I've traveled with this palette, believe it or not. The only thing I would change about this palette is that I do feel that this palette is a little big. Now, do I want to eliminate any of these colors? No, but it is big. Okay, beauties. The last, but definitely not least. I'm actually curious which ones you guys think is going to be the first palette we're going to talk about. Again, this is not a ranking, but this palette could be number one. So I'm curious what you think is going to be number one, and I want you to write it in the comments below before we proceed. But number one palette is Rogue from Fantasy Cosmetica. Beauties, I love this palette. I mean, I probably don't need to explain why I love this palette so much. This is like me in a palette. All the colors in here. I already have a full review of this palette. The quality is amazing. And you can get a lot of different looks with it. You do have some light colors. So the complaint I always have about smaller 9 pans doesn't apply to this palette. It has a mirror. It's pretty small and compact. It's easy to travel with. Like that wasn't enough. The pans are also magnetic. So they come out with one of those magnetic tools. Yes, beauties, this is an amazing palette to own because you can also mix and match these if you make your own custom-made palette or if you just want to travel with a quad of these 9s. The only complaint I have about this palette, or the only change I would make to this palette, is the matte black. That could have been a dark green or a dark purple or something. So Fantasy Cosmetica, we've talked about it already in the video that I did. But otherwise, I love this palette. If these are your colors, definitely consider checking this palette out. Okay, beauties, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I want to know what's your favorite palette of this year. Write to me in the comments below. Thanks for being here with me. I love you all. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed yet. Have an amazing day, and until next time, bye.